Hello, so it's Looking for Alaska Part 2, we're on Chapter 3. Just have a drink. 127 days before. Early the next afternoon, I blinked sweat from my eyes as I taped a Van Gogh poster to the back of the door. The Colonel sat on the couch judging whether the poster was level and fielding my endless questions about Alaska. What's her story? She's from Vine Station. You could drive past without noticing. I've got a spider. She's from Vine Station. You could drive past it without noticing. And from what I understand, you ought to. Her boyfriend's a Vanderbilt on scholarship, plays bass in some band, don't know much about her family, so she really likes him, I guess. She hasn't cheated on him, which is a first, and so on. All morning, and I'd been unable to care about anything else, not the Van Gogh poster, not the video games, and not even my class schedule, which the Eagle had brought by that morning. He introduced himself too. Welcome to Culver Creek, Mr. Holter. You're given a large measure of freedom here. If you abuse it, you'll regret it. You seem like a nice young man. I'd hate to have bid you farewell. And then he stared at me in a manner that was either serious or seriously malicious. Alaska calls that the look of doom. The Colonel told me after the Eagle left, the next time you see that, you're busted. Okay, Pudge, the Colonel said, as I stepped away from the poster. Not entirely level, but close enough. Enough with the Alaska already. By my count, there are 92 girls at this school, and every last one of them is less crazy than Alaska, who, might I add, already has a boyfriend. I'm going to lunch. It's Friday day. He walked out, leaving the door, feeling like an over-infatuated idiot. I got up to close the door. The Colonel, already halfway across the dorm circle, turned around. Christ, are you coming or what? You can say a lot of bad things about Alabama, but you can't say that Alabama, as the people are unduly afraid of deep fryers. In that first week at Creek, the cafeteria served fried chicken, chicken fried steak and fried okra, which marked my first foray into the delicacy that is a fried vegetable. I half expected them to fry the iceberg lettuce, but nothing matched the bufrido, a dish created by Maureen, the amazingly and understandably obese Culver Creek cook. A deep fried bean burrito, the bufrido, proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that frying always improves food. Sitting with the Colonel and 5 guys, I didn't know what a circular table in the cafeteria the afternoon. I sank my teeth into the crunchy shell of my first bufrido and experienced a culinary orgasm. My mum cooked okay, but I immediately wanted to bring Maureen home with me over Thanksgiving. I've got like bugs crawling all over me. The Colonel introduced me as Pudge to the guys at the wobbly wooden table, but I only registered the name Takimi, whom Alaska had mentioned yesterday, a thin Japanese guy only a few inches taller than the Colonel. Takumi talked with his mouth full as I chewed slowly, savouring the beanie crunch. God, Takumi said to me, there's nothing like watching a man eat his first burrito. I didn't say much, partly because no one asked me any questions, and partly because I just wanted to eat as much as I could, but Takumi felt so modest. He could and did eat and chew and swallow while talking. The lunch discussion centred on the girl who was supposed to have been Alaska's roommate, Maria, and her boyfriend Paul, who had been a weekday warrior. They'd gotten kicked out in the last week of the previous school year. I learned for what the Colonel called the trifecta. They were caught committing 3 of Culver Creek's expellable offences at once, lying naked in bed together, genital contact being offence number 1, already drunk number 2, and they were smoking a joint number 3. When the Eagle burst in on them, rumours had it that someone had ratted them out, and Takimi seemed intent on finding out who. Intent enough, anyway, to shout about it with his mouth jam-packed with bufrido. Paul was an arsehole, said the Colonel. I would have ratted on them, but anyone who shacks up with a Jaeger driving weekday warrior like Paul deserves what she gets. Dude, Takumi responded. Your girlfriend. And then he swallowed a bite of food. It's weekday warrior. True, the Colonel laughed. Much to my chagrin, this is an incontestable fact, but she is not as big as an arsehole as Paul. Not quite, Takumi smirked. The Colonel laughed, and I wondered why he wouldn't stand up for his girlfriend. I wouldn't have cared if my girlfriend was a Jaeger driving cyclops with a beard. I'd have been grateful just to have someone to make out with. That evening when the Colonel dropped by room 43 to pick up the cigarettes, he seemed to have forgotten that they were technically mine. I didn't really care when he didn't invite me out with him. In public school, I'd known plenty of people who made it a habit to hate this kind of person, or that kind. The geeks hated the preps, etc. And it always seemed like a big waste of time to me. The Colonel didn't tell me where he'd spent the afternoon or where he was going to spend the evening, but he closed the door behind him when he left, so I guess I wasn't welcome. Just as well, I spent the night surfing the web, no porn I swear, just reading The Final Days, a book about Richard Nixon and Watergate. For dinner I microwaved and refrigerated Rafido. The Colonel had snuck it out of the cafeteria. It reminded me of nights in Florida, except with better food and no air conditioning. Lying in bed and reading felt pleasantly familiar. I decided to heed what I'm sure would have been my mother's advice and get a good night's sleep before my first day of class. French 2 started at 8:10 and figuring it couldn't take more than 8 minutes to put on some clothes and walk to the classroom, I set my alarm for 8:02. I took a shower and then lay in bed waiting for sleep to save me from the heat. Around 11, I realised the tiny fan clipped to my bunk might make more of a difference if I took off my shirt, and finally fell asleep on top of the sheets wearing just boxers. A decision I found myself regretting some hours later when I awoke to 2 sweaty, meaty hands shaking the holy hell out of me. I woke up completely and instantly sitting up straight in bed. Terrified and couldn't understand the voices for some reason. Couldn't understand why there were any voices at all, and what the hell time was it anyway. And finally my head cleared enough to hear, "Come on kid, don't make us kick your ass, just get up." And then from the top bunk I heard, "Christ Pudge, just get up." So I got up, saw for the first time 3 shadowy figures. 2 of them grabbed me, one with a hand on each of my upper arms, and walked me out of the room. On the way out, the Colonel mumbled, "Have a good time, go easy on him, Kevin." They led me almost at a jog behind my dorm building and then across the soccer field. The ground was grassy but gravelly too, and I wondered why no one had shown the common courtesy to tell me to put on shoes, and why I was out there in my underwear, chicken legs exposed to the world. 1,000 humiliations crossed my mind. There's no new junior, Miles Holter, but handcuffed to the soccer goal wearing only his boxers. I imagined them taking me into the woods where they now seemed headed, and beating the shit out of me so that I looked great for my first day of school. And the whole time I just stared at my feet because I didn't want to look at them and I didn't want to fall, so I watched my steps trying to avoid the bigger rocks. I felt the fight or flight reflex swell up in me over and over again, but I knew that neither fight nor flight had ever worked before. They took me a roundabout way to the fake beach, and then I knew what would happen. A good old-fashioned dunking in the lake, and I calmed down. I could handle that. When we reached the beach, they told me to put my arms at my side, and the beefiest guy grabbed 2 rolls of duct tape from the sand. With my arms flat against my sides like a soldier at attention, they mummified me from shoulder to my wrists, then threw me down on the ground. The sand, the fake beach cushioned the landing, but I still hit my head. 2 of them pulled my legs together, while the other one, Kevin I'd figured out, put his angular, strong jaw faced up so close to mine that the gel-soaked spikes of his hair pointing out from his forehead poked at my face, and told me, "This is for the Colonel, you shouldn't hang out with that arsehole." They taped my legs together from the ankles to thighs. I looked like a silver mummy. I said, "Please don't, guys." Just before they taped my mouth shut, they picked me up and hurled me into the water. Sinking, but instead of feeling panic or anything else, it occurred to me that "please guys, don't" were terrible last words, but the great miracle of the human species, a buoyancy? No, I don't actually know how to pronounce those words, like what they are, the circle things. It came through, and as I felt myself floating towards the surface, I twisted and turned as best I could so that the warm night air hit my nose first, and I breathed. I wasn't dead and I wasn't going to die. Well, I thought that wasn't so bad. But there was still the small matter of getting to the shore before the sun rose. First to determine my position vis-a-vis the shoreline. If I tilted my head too much, I felt my whole body start to roll. And on the long list of unpleasant ways to die, face down in soaking wet boxers is pretty high up there. So instead I rolled my eyes and craned my neck back, my eyes almost underwater until I saw the shore, not 10 feet away, was directly behind my head. I began to swim, an armless silver mermaid, using only my hips to generate motion, until finally my ass scraped against the lake's mucky bottom. I turned then and used my hips and waist to roll 3 times until I came ashore, near a ratty green towel they'd left They left me a towel. How thoughtful. The water had seeped under the duct tape and loosened the adhesive grip on my skin, but the tape was wrapped around me 3 layers deep in places which necessitated I can't pronounce it. Necessitated wiggling like a fish out of water. Finally, it loosened enough for me to slip my left hand up and out against my chest and rip the tape off. I wrapped myself in the sandy towel. I didn't want to go back to my room and see Chip because I had no idea what Kevin had meant. Maybe if I went back to my room they'd be waiting for me and they'd get me for real. Maybe I needed to show them, okay, got your message, he's just my roommate, not my friend. And anyway, I didn't feel terribly friendly towards the Colonel. Have a good time, he said. Yeah, I thought. I had a ball. So I went to Alaska's room. I didn't know what time it was, but I could see a faint light underneath her door. I knocked softly. Yeah, she said, and I came in, wet and sandy, only wearing a towel and soaking boxers. This was not, obviously, how you want the world's hottest girl to see you, but I figured she could explain to me what had just happened. She put down a book and got out of bed with a sheet wrapped around her shoulders. For a moment she looked concerned. She looked like the girl I met yesterday, the girl who said I was cute and bubbled over with energy and silliness and intelligence. And then she laughed. Guess you went for a swim, huh? And she said it with such casual malice that I felt that everyone had known, and I wondered why the whole damn school agreed in advance to possibly drain Miles Halter. But Alaska liked the Colonel, and in the confusion of the moment I just looked at her blankly, unsure even of what to ask. Give me a break, she said. Come on, you know what? There are people with real problems. I've got real problems. Mummy ain't here, so buck up, big guy. I left without saying a word to her and went to my room, slamming the door behind me. Waking the Colonel and stomping into the bathroom, I got in the shower to wash the algae in the lake off of me. But the ridiculous faucet of a shower head failed spectacularly. And how could Alaska and Kevin and those other guys already dislike me? After I finished the shower, I dried off and went into the room to find some clothes. So, he said, what took you so long? Get lost on your way home. They said it was because of you, I said, and my voice betrayed a hint of annoyance. They said I shouldn't hang out with you. What? No, it happens to everybody, the Colonel said. It happened to me. They throw you in the lake, you swim out and walk home. I couldn't just swim out, I said softly, pulling a pair of jean shorts beneath my towel. They duct taped me. I couldn't even move. Wait, he said, and hopped out of his bunk, staring at me through the darkness. They taped you? How? And I showed him. I stood like a mummy with my feet together and my hands at my sides, and showed him how they'd wrapped me up and plopped me down on the couch. Christ, you could have drowned. They're just supposed to throw you in the water in your underwear and run, he shouted. What the hell were they thinking? Who was it? Kevin Richmond and who else? Do you remember their faces? Yeah, I think. Why the hell would they do that, he wondered. Did you do something to them? I asked. No, but I'm sure as shit gonna do something to him now. We'll get him. It wasn't a big deal, I got out fine. You could have died. I could have, I suppose, but I didn't. Well, maybe I should just go to the Eagle tomorrow and tell him, I said. Absolutely not, he answered. He walked over to his crumpled shorts laying on the floor and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He lit 2 and handed me one. I smoked the whole goddamn thing. You're not, he continued, because that's how shit gets dealt with here. And besides, you really don't want to get the reputation for ratting. But we will deal with those bastards, Pudge, I promise you. They'll regret messing with one of my friends. And if the Colonel thought that calling me his friend would make me stand by him, well, he was right. Alaska was kind of mean to me tonight, I said, and leaned over, opened an empty desk drawer and used it as a makeshift ashtray. Like I said, she's moody. I went to bed wearing a t-shirt, shorts and socks. No matter how miserably hot it got, I resolved I would sleep in my clothes every night at the creek, feeling, probably for the first time in my life, the fear and excitement of living in a place where you never know what's going to happen or when. That's the end of chapter 3. I'm gonna have a little drink because my mouth is dry. I have read this book 3 times before and I can feel myself mispronouncing words and it's really doing my head in. Sanitizer. Oh, I got a paper cut earlier and I've just strung it. 126 days before. Well, no, it's war, the Colonel shouted the next morning. I rolled over and looked at the clock. 7:52, my first Culver Creek class. French started in 18 minutes. I blinked a couple of times and looked up at the Colonel, who was standing between the couch and the coffee table, holding his well-worn once white tennis shoes by the laces. For a long time he stared at me and I stared at him, and then, almost in slow motion, a grin crept across the Colonel's face. "I've got to hand it to them," he said finally. "That was pretty clever." "What?" I asked. "Last night, before they woke you up, I guess, they pissed in my shoes." "Are you sure?" I said, trying not to laugh. "Do you care to smell?" he asked, holding the shoes towards me. Because I went ahead and smelled them, and yes, I am sure if there's one thing I know, it's when I've just stepped in another man's piss. It's like my mum always says, you think she's walking on water, but turns out you just got piss in your shoes. "Point those guys out to me if you see them today," he added. "Because we need to figure out why they're sort of pissed at me, and we need to go ahead and start thinking about how we're going to ruin their miserable little lives." When I received the Culver Creek handbook over the summer, I noticed happily that the dress code section contained only 2 words: casual modesty. It never occurred to me that girls would show up for class half asleep in cotton pyjama shorts, t-shirt and flip-flops. Modest, I guess, and casual. And there was something about girls wearing pyjamas, even if modest, which might have made French at 8:10 in the morning bearable. If I'd had any idea what Madame O'Malley was talking about. Comment this too. Oh my god, I don't know nearly enough French to pass French 2. And Francais, my French 1 class back in Florida did not prepare me for Madame O'Malley, who skipped the "how was your summer" pleasantries and dived directly into something called passé composé, which is apparently a verb tense. Alaska sat directly across from me in a circle of desks, but she didn't look at me once the entire class, even though I could notice little but her. Maybe she could be mean, but the way she taught the first night about getting out of the labyrinth, so smart, and the way her mouth curled up on the right side all the time, like she was preparing to smirk, like she'd mastered the right half of the Mona Lisa's imitable smile. From my room, the student population seemed manageable, but it overwhelmed me in the classroom area, which was a single long building just beyond the dorm circle. The building was split into 14 rooms, facing towards the lake. Kids crammed the narrow sidewalks in front of the classrooms, and even though finding my classes wasn't hard, even with my poor sense of direction, I could get from French in room 3 to pre-calc in room 1-2. That's 12. Pre-calc in room 12. I don't know why I said 1-2. There you go. I felt unsettled all day. I didn't know anyone, couldn't even figure out whom I should be trying to know, and the classes were hard, even on the first day. My dad had told me I had to study, and now I believed him. The teachers were serious and smart, and a lot of them went by doctor, and so when the time came for my last class before lunch, World Religions, I felt tremendous relief. A vestige from the Culver Creek was a Christian boys' school. I figured the World Religious class required every junior and senior might be an easy A. It was my only class all day where the desks weren't arranged either in a square or a circle, so not wanting to seem eager, I sat down in the 3rd row at 11:03. I was 7 minutes early, partly because I liked to be punctual and partly because I didn't have anyone to chat with out in the halls. Shortly thereafter, the Colonel came in with Takumi and sat down on the opposite side of me. "I heard about last night," Takumi said. "Alaska's pissed." "That's weird, since she was such a bitch last night," I blurted out. Takumi just shook his head. "Yeah, well, she didn't know the whole story, and people are moody, dude. You gotta get used to living with people. You could have worse friends than..." The Colonel cut him off. "Enough with the psychobabble, Mr. MC Dr. Phil. Let's talk counterinsurgency." People were starting to file into class, so the Colonel leaned towards me and whispered, "If any of them are in his class, let me know. Just here, put X's where they're sitting," and he ripped off a sheet of paper out of his notebook and drew a score of each desk. As people filled in, I saw one of them, the tall one with immaculately spiky hair, Kevin. Kevin stared down the Colonel as he walked past, but in trying to stir, he forgot to watch his step and bumped his thigh against a desk. The Colonel laughed. One of the other guys, the one was either a little fat or worked out too much. He came in behind Kevin, sporting pleated khaki pants and a short-sleeved black polo shirt. They sat down. I crossed through the appropriate squares on the Colonel's diagram and handed it to him. Just then the old man shuffled in. He breathed slowly and with great labour through his wide-open mouth. He took tiny steps at the lectern, his heels not moving much past his toes. The Colonel nudged me and pointed casually to his notebook, which read, "The old man only has one lung," and I did not doubt it. His audible, almost desperate breaths reminded me of my grandfather, when he was dying of lung cancer. barrel-chested and ancient. The old man, it seemed to me, might die before he even reached the podium. "My name," he said, "is Dr. Hyde. I have a first name, of course, so as far as you're concerned, it is Doctor. Your parents pay a great deal of money so that you can attend school here, and I expect that you will offer some return on their investment by reading what I tell you to read when I tell you to read it, and consistently attending this class. And when you are here, you will listen to what I say. Clearly not an easy A. This year we'll be studying 3 religious traditions: Islam, Christianity and Buddhism. We'll tackle 3 more traditions next year, and in my class I will talk most of the time and you will listen most of the time. Because you may be smart, but I've been smart longer. I'm sure some of you like to lecture classes. I'm sure some of you do not like lecture classes, but as you probably noted, I'm not as young as I used to be and would love to spend my remaining breath chatting with you about finer points of Islamic history. But our time together is short. I must talk and you must listen, for we are engaged here in the most important pursuit in history, the search for meaning. What is the nature of being a person? What is the best way to go about being a person? How do we come to be, and what will become of us when we are no longer? In short, we are the rules of this game and how we might best play it. The nature of the labyrinth I scribbled into my spiral notebook, and the way out of it. This teacher rocked. I hated discussion classes. I hated talking, and I hated listening to everyone else stumble on their words and try to phrase things in the vaguest possible way so they wouldn't sound dumb. And I hated how it was all just a game of trying to figure out what the teacher wanted to hear and then saying it. I'm in class, so teach me, and teach me he did. In those 50 minutes, the old man made me take religion seriously. I'd never been religious, but he told us that religion is important, whether or not we believed in one. In the same way that historical events are important, whether or not you personally lived through them. And then he assigned us 50 pages of reading for the next day, from a book called Religious Studies. That afternoon I had 2 classes and 2 free periods. Had nine 50-minute class periods each day, which meant that most everyone had 3 study periods, except for the Colonel, who had an extra independent study math class on account of being an extra special genius. The Colonel and I had biology together, where I pointed out the other guy who duct taped me the night before. In the top corner of his notebook, the Colonel wrote, "Longwell Chase, Senior W Day, Warrior, friends with Sarah, weird." It took me a minute to remember who Sarah was, the Colonel's girlfriend. I spent my 3 periods in my room trying to read about religion. I learned that myth doesn't mean a lie, it means a tradition story that tells you something about people and the worldview and what they hold sacred. Interesting. I also learned that after the events of previous night, I was far too tired to care about the myths or anything else. So I slept on top of the covers for most of the afternoon, until I awoke to Alaska singing "Wake Up Little Pudge" directly into my left ear canal. I held the religion book close up against my chest like a small paperback security blanket. "That was terrible," I said. "What do I need to do to ensure that never happens to me again?" "Nothing you can do," she said excitedly. "I'm unpredictable." "God, don't you hate Dr. Hyde? Don't you? He's so condescending." I sat up and said, "I think he's a genius." Partly because I thought it was true, and partly because I just felt like disagreeing with her. She sat down on the bed. "Do you always sleep in your clothes?" "Yup." "Funny," she said. "You weren't wearing much last night." I just glared at her. "Come on, Pudge, I'm teasing. You have to be tough here. I don't know how bad it was, and I'm sorry and they'll regret it, but you have to be tough." And then she left. That was all she had to say on the subject. She's cute, I thought, but you don't need a girl who treats you like you're 10. You've already got a mum. The end of chapter 4. 122 days before. After my last class of my first week at Culver Creek, I entered room 43, to an unlikely sight. The diminutive and shirtless Colonel hunched over an ironing board, attacking a pink button-down shirt. Sweat trickled down his forehead and chest as he ironed with great enthusiasm, his right arm pushing the iron across the length of the shirt with such vigour that his breathing nearly mirrored Dr. Hyde's. "I have a date," he explained. "This is an emergency." He paused to catch his breath. "Do you know," breathe, "how to iron?" I walked over to the pink shirt. It was wrinkled like an old woman who spent her youth sunbathing. If only the Colonel didn't ball up everything belonging and stuff into random drawers. "I think you just turn it on and press it against the shirt, right?" I said. "I don't know, I didn't even know we had an iron." "We don't, it's Takumi's, but Takumi doesn't know how to iron either. and when I asked Alaska, she started yelling, "Ah!" Not going to impose the patriarchal paradigm on me. Oh god, I need to smoke, but I can't reek when I see Sarah's parents. Okay, screw it, we're gonna smoke in the bathroom with the shower on. The shower has steam gets rid of wrinkles, right? By the way, he said, I followed him into the bathroom. If you want to smoke inside during the day, just turn on the shower. The smoke follows the steam up the vents. Though this made no scientific sense, it seemed to work. The shower's shortage of water pressure and low shower head made it all but useless for showering, but worked great as a smoke screen. Sadly, it made a poor iron. The Colonel tried ironing the shirt once more. I'm just going to push really hard to see if that helps, and finally put it on wrinkled. He matched the shirt with a blue tie decorated with horizontal lines of little pink flamingos. The one thing my lazy father taught me, the Colonel said, as his hands nimbly threaded the tie into a perfect knot, was how to tie a tie, which is odd since I can't imagine when he ever had to wear one. Just then, Sarah knocked on the door. I'd seen her once or twice before, but the Colonel never introduced me to her, and I didn't have a chance to that night. Oh my god, can't you at least press your shirt, she asked, even though the Colonel was standing in front of the ironing board. We're going out with my parents. Sarah looked awfully nice in her blue summer dress. Her long pale blonde hair was pulled up into a twist with a strand of hair falling down each side of her face. She looked like a movie star. A bitchy one. Look, I did my best, we don't all have maids to do ironing. That chip on your shoulder makes you look even shorter. Christ, can't we get out the door without fighting? I'm just saying, it's the opera, it's a big deal to my parents. Whatever, let's go. I felt like leaving, but it seemed stupid to hide in the bathroom, and Sarah was standing in the doorway, one hand cocked on her hip and the other fiddling with her car keys. I could wear a tuxedo and your parents would still hate me, he shouted. That's not my fault, you antagonised them. She held up the car keys in front of him. Look, we're going now or we're not going. Fuck it, I'm not going anywhere with you, the Colonel said. Fine, have a great night. Sarah slammed the door so hard, a sizable biography of Leo Tolstoy, last words, the truth is I care a great deal, what they, fell off my bookshelf and landed with a thud on our checkered floor like an echo of the slamming door. Ah, he screamed. So that's Sarah, I said. Yeah, she seems nice. The Colonel laughed, knelt down next to the mini fridge and pulled out a gallon of milk. He opened it, took a swig, winced, half coughed and sat down on the couch with the milk between his legs. Is it sour or something? Oh, I should have mentioned that earlier. This isn't milk. It's the 5 parts milk, 1 part vodka. I call it ambrosia. Drink of the gods. You can barely smell the vodka in the milk. The downside is that it tastes like sour milk and rubbing alcohol, but it's Friday night punch and my girlfriend is a bitch. Want some? I think I'll pass. Aside from a few sips of champagne on New Year's under the watchful eye of my parents, I'd never really drunk any alcohol, and ambrosia didn't seem like the drink with which to start. Outside I heard the payphone ring. Given the fact that 190 borders share 5 payphones, I was amazed at how infrequently it rang. We weren't supposed to have cell phones, but I'd noticed that some of the weekday warriors carried them surreptitiously. And most non-warriors called their parents, as I did, on a regular basis, so parents only called when their kids forgot. Are you gonna get that? The Colonel asked me. I didn't feel like being bossed around by him, but I also didn't feel like fighting. Through a buggy twilight, I walked to the payphone, which was drilled into the wall between rooms 44 and 45. On both sides of the phone, dozens of phone numbers and esoteric notes were written in pen and marker. 205 555 Tommy to airport. Calling the payphone required a great deal of patience. I picked up on the 9th ring. Can you get Chip for me? Sarah asked. It sounded like it was on a cell phone. Yeah, hold on. I turned and he was already behind me, as if he knew it would be her. I handed him the receiver and walked back to the room. A minute later, 3 words made their way to our room through the thick, still air of Alabama. Still air of Alabama at almost night. Screw you too, the Colonel shouted. Back in the room, he sat down with his ambrosia and told me. She says I ratted out Paul and Maria. That's how you pronounce it. Paul and Maria. That's what the warriors are saying, that I ratted them out. Me. That's why they piss in the shoes. That's why they're nearly killing you. Because you live with me and they say I'm a rat. I tried to remember who Paul and Maria were. The names were familiar, but I'd heard so many names in the last week and I couldn't match Paul and Maria with faces. And then I remembered why. I'd never seen them. They got kicked out the year before, having committed the trifecta. How long have you been dating her? I asked. 9 months. We never got along. I mean, I didn't even briefly like her. Like my mum and dad. My dad would get pissed and then he would beat the shit out of my mum. And then my dad would be all nice and they'd have like a honeymoon period. But with Sarah, there's never a honeymoon period. God, how could she think that I was a rat? I know. Why don't we just break up? He ran a hand through his hair, clutching a fistful of it atop of his head, and said, I guess I stay with her because she stays with me. And that's not an easy thing to do. I'm a bad boyfriend, she's a bad girlfriend. We deserve one another. But I can't believe they think that, he said, as he walked toward the bookshelf and pulled down the almanac. He took a long pull of his ambrosia. Goddamn weekday warriors. It probably one of them that ratted out Paul and Maria and then blamed me to cover their tracks. Anyway, it's a good night for staying in with Pudge and ambrosia. I said, wanting to say that I didn't understand how you could kiss someone who believed you were a rat if being a rat was the worst thing in the world. But the Colonel cut me off. Not another word about it. You know what the capital of Sierra Leone is? No, me neither, he said, but I intend to find out. And with that, he stuck his nose in an almanac and the conversation was over. That's the end of that chapter. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. Don't come for me people who read, but I don't have a bookmark. That was really lovely. I absolutely love reading, it just brings me so much joy. And I really hope that you enjoyed reading with me. I hope that my mispronunciation of things and my slight dyslexia did not make it difficult to sit and listen to, I guess. Hopefully the weather's nice tomorrow and we can do it again.